This is SenseTalking, and welcome to The Explainer. All right, let's paint a picture for you. The year is 2025. The month is September. Donald Trump is hosting this very exclusive dinner for the biggest names in Silicon Valley. I mean, we're talking the heavy hitters, execs from Google, Meta, Microsoft, you name it. On the surface, it looks like a celebration of American ingenuity. The atmosphere is super friendly, almost like a victory lap. Trump is just showering these folks with compliments, calling them a high IQ group. The CEOs, in turn, are thanking him for this new pro-business attitude. It really looks like the start of a beautiful friendship. But here's the thing, it wasn't always so cozy. I mean, just look at this contrast. It's night and day, right? It wasn't that long ago that Trump was big tech's biggest foe. He literally called Facebook an enemy of the people, launched antitrust lawsuits against Google and Meta, and even tried to get TikTok banned completely. And now, these guys are the guests of honor. That's the billion-dollar question, isn't it? What on earth could cause a 180-degree turn like that? How do you go from public enemy number one to a celebrated partner in the eyes of the exact same administration? Well, the answer, according to our source material, comes down to one simple thing: money. But not just any money. We're talking about cash flowing through a very specific, incredibly powerful, and almost totally unregulated channel: the Presidential Inauguration Fund. This right here is the key to this whole story. So what even is an inauguration fund? Officially, its job is pretty simple. Pay for the big party, right? The parade, the balls, the whole shebang. But in reality, because there are so few rules, it's become this perfect, totally legal way for corporations to buy a little something priceless: influence. And this slide really breaks down why it's a donor's dream come true. There's no limit on how much a company can chip in, zero restrictions on who's allowed to donate, and almost no real oversight on what happens to the money after all the confetti is swept up. It's basically a loophole you could drive a fleet of armored trucks through. Okay, so let's get down to brass tacks. What does that kind of cash actually get you? Let's dig into some specific examples, starting with those tech giants who were all smiles at that dinner. $1 million. For a lot of the companies in that room, this seems to have been the magic number, kind of like the price of admission. Let's take Meta, the company that runs Facebook. They donated right around $1 million to the fund. And you won't believe what happened next. So before the donation, Meta was in hot water, facing a huge federal investigation over collecting users' financial data illegally. After the donation, poof, the investigation gets dropped. And not just that, the entire agency leading the charge, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, gets taken apart. Meta's massive headache just vanished. And this wasn't a one-off. We see pretty much the same playbook with Google. They also dropped about $1 million into the fund while a giant antitrust case was hanging over their heads. The result? A surprisingly small fine that barely made a dent. The same president who once threatened to break them up was now on TV congratulating their CEO. And then we've got Apple. Their CEO, Tim Cook, personally donated $1 million. Now, at the time, Apple was facing down these new tariffs that were going to cost them billions. But after that contribution, the White House quietly carved out some very specific exemptions just for Apple. From a purely business angle, you can't ask for a better return on investment. And look, this wasn't just a couple of companies getting lucky. Research from the watchdog group Public Citizen found that a full 1/3, 1 out of every 3 government lawsuits against big tech was dropped after Trump came back into office. This wasn't a coincidence. It was a clear pattern. But this story gets so much bigger than just Silicon Valley. This exact same pattern, a huge donation followed by a very helpful government action, was playing out across some of America's most powerful industries. Let's talk about the fund's #1 corporate donor, Pilgrim's Pride, a massive poultry producer. They didn't write a check for $1 million. They gave $5 million. So what does $5 million buy a chicken company? Well, just a few months later, the Department of Agriculture eased up on regulations, letting poultry plants run their processing lines faster. This was a direct boost to the company's bottom line, and it got pushed through even though safety groups had been screaming about the risks to workers. And what's wild is that once you start looking for it, you see this everywhere. Big Oil donates, and suddenly they've got expanded drilling rights and huge tax breaks. The AI chip maker, NVIDIA, gives $1 million. A crucial ban on chip sales to China gets reversed.
Airlines pony up, and boom, new rules to protect passengers are thrown out. The crypto industry gets in on the action and gets rewarded with friendly laws and investigations being dropped. You get the picture.
All told, the fund raked in over $240 million. That's the most ever raised in American history, from almost 800 different donors. I mean, the sheer scale of the money flowing into this one place is just staggering. And this chart gives you a pretty clear idea of where that mountain of cash came from. The top 3 donor industries: technology, oil and gas, and pharmaceuticals. All sectors that, surprise, surprise, saw a lot of rules relaxed and got some very favorable new policies during this time. The connection is pretty hard to miss. So, let's step back for a second and put a name to what we've been looking at. What do you call a system where public policy seems to be driven by money and who you know?
Well, critics have a name for it: political patronage. It's when power works based on loyalty, favors, and cash, instead of, what's best for the public or what the rules say. $1 million might get you a seat at the table. $5 million might let you rewrite the menu.
And here's the really unsettling part. For all the things we know, there's so much more that we don't. A big chunk of these donations came from what's called dark money sources, untraceable shell companies and nonprofits with these vague, patriotic-sounding names like Election Freedom, Inc. We might never know who was really pulling all the strings. One political analyst from our source material really nailed it when they said this whole thing serves as a blueprint for recentering corporate power at the expense of the public. It's a quiet, shockingly effective way to buy influence, all done legally under the guise of paying for a party.
Because at the end of the day, all this money and all this access, it leads to real changes in policy that affect all of us. And that leaves us with one last pretty heavy question to think about. When access to the highest levels of power has a price tag, who is it that really ends up paying?